welcome to the Indiana University Cinema's virtual screening room. I'm Brittany Friesner, the cinema's interim director. To begin tonight's program, we would like to acknowledge that Indiana University Cinema is built and operates upon the ancestral lands of the indigenous peoples of the Miami, the Potawatomi, the Delaware, and the Shawnee nations. We are grateful to work on this land and implore you to reflect on the land from which you're watching tonight. We say it each and every week, and it remains true, we miss you. But we're so grateful and appreciative you continue to engage with us through our online events. Thank you for joining us tonight for the 2020 documentary Coded Bias, directed by Shalini Kantaya. Tonight's program is a part of our ongoing Science on Screen series, which is a national initiative of the Coolidge Corner Theater with major support from the Alfred P. Sloan Foundation. Science on Screen inspires cinemas nationwide to curate and creatively present screenings of classic, cult, and documentary films with introductions and discussions by notable figures from the worlds of science, technology, and medicine. IU Cinema is honored to be one of the 2019-2020 Science on Screen Award recipients, marking the 4th time we have received this honor. We'd also like to offer effusive thanks to the Center of Excellence for Women in Technology, with special thanks to Jenny Hurdle for helping present and promote tonight's program and for assembling such an amazing and distinguished panel of guests for our post-film conversation. Introducing tonight's film and moderating our post-film conversation is Dr. Vivian Nunn Halloran, who is Associate Dean for Diversity and Inclusion in the College of Arts and Sciences. She is also Professor of English. At the center, she serves as the Faculty Director for SHAPE, which stands for Social Sciences, Humanities, Arts, the Professions, and Education. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Vivian Nunn Halloran.
Good evening. Thank you, Brittany. Directed by Shalini Kantaya, the documentary Coded Bias introduces us to the idea of algorithmic justice as one of the new frontiers of the ongoing struggle for civil rights in America and human rights throughout the world. The film powerfully centers the voices of women as they first describe how artificial intelligence, machine learning, and algorithms duplicate existing social disparities into the realm of the digital, and then highlight the dire implications of governments and corporations using these technologies whose inner workings they don't fully comprehend. This is a visually compelling and at times disturbing narrative that fully engages its audience and asks us to rethink our assumptions of about our own relationship to technology and how we use it daily. And so now we'd like to go back to Brittany, who is going to let us know how to access the film this evening.
Thank you, Vivian. At the end of this introduction, you will see information about how to watch the film on your screen, and we'll also be including this information in the chat. Please note the film will not screen through this Zoom webinar window, although we do recommend you keep this window open because there'll be a countdown to the start of the Q&A. To access the film, you'll need to open a web browser using the URL and passcode you see displayed on the screen when I leave the screen. We look forward to seeing you back here after the film for what is sure to be an engaging and insightful conversation. Enjoy the film. Welcome back, everyone, and thank you for watching Coded Bias and for joining us for our post-film conversation. We'll start out with a discussion between our guests, and after about 20-25 minutes, we'll open it up for audience questions. Please feel free to begin typing questions in the Q&A box at any time, which you'll find by clicking the Q&A button at the bottom of your Zoom screen. And now, please join me in welcoming back Dr. Vivian Nunn Halloran.
Thank you. And now it is my pleasure to introduce today's this evening's panel of experts from Indiana University. I'll start with Mehmet Dalkilic. He's an associate professor of computer science and an adjunct in the Department of Statistics. He's the director of the data science undergraduate program. He works in data science, focusing on the effects of climate change, improving algorithms to work with big data. And Professor Dalkilic also created the graduate computational biology program. Our second panelist is Beth Blaley. She is the director of the Data to Insights Center. She's also the Michael A. and Lori Burns McRoby Bicentennial Professor of Computer Engineering. Dr. Blaley's research interest and expertise is in the areas of smart and connected communities, open science, and responsible AI and high performance computing. Our third and final panelist is Karen Hausch. She is a graduate research assistant at the Center for Research on Learning and Technology. Karen is originally from Trinidad and Tobago. She is currently engaged in a research project developing AI technology to aid in classroom orchestration and student navigation through a 3D ecosystem game. Welcome to all of you this evening. I wanted to start off by asking Karen if you might want to comment on the film from your own perspective as a graduate student and what that's like for you.
Well, for me, I think the thing that resonated the most was the fact that we unknowingly add to this problem all the time. Even now, as we are students engaged in research projects, what schools do we go to? What is the data that we feed the AI? Because that's what we're doing now. We're building AI, giving it data for machine learning. But the question is, do we look for diverse population? Do we take the easiest population? What are we training this AI to learn? And what will they make? Because, students from different populations, they speak differently. So if we're going to analyze the chat and we only feed them the information from one group of learners, then doesn't that create a bias against other students when we carry this out to other schools, other populations? And it's never a vindictive thing. It's just we take what's easy at hand. But this documentary, it really brought to the foreground the implications of the simple decisions that we make and how that can impact so many people and to such an extent. So I think it's just something we all need to be mindful of as we engage in this technology and what we would like to pursue, because it can so easily snowball into something that we would not want to see happen. And I really think that, Joy's experience really resonated with me because I see myself as a graduate student, how I am feeding into this problem. But, we deal with what we have and the resources that we have at hand and the schools that are easy for us to, and the populations that are easy for us to access. So this is more than just, the basic data that you have in social media, whatnot, but the research that we engage in day to day. So that was the biggest thing that resonated with me.
Thank you. And that brings me to then asking Memo from the faculty member's perspective, then someone who is a computer scientist assembling large data sets. What concerns do you have when you do that? And to what degree do you communicate your process to the graduate students who work with you?
Sure. I'd like to first say I think the documentary was gut-wrenching, but also offered some ray of hope. In reflecting on what its contents offered, I looked back into some of my books and discovered that Norbert Wiener in 1950 claimed that there should be some ethical element of computer science. But what's interesting is it really laid rather fallow until perhaps maybe 15, 20 years ago when Christina Gorniak said that ethics for computer science really is going to be fundamentally different than ethics for people, because computers don't know borders. They don't understand what it means to be human. And I think this documentary speaks to that. To answer your first question, I so far have only worked outside of the human element. So I look at, let's say, destruction of coral and disease, and look at climate as it affects it, or I look at stellar objects in the Milky Way to discover what galactic component, or I've worked on the IU bus system, believe it or not, and we were able to improve transportation here at IU by, and now I'm uncomfortable saying it, by looking at improving goodwill of the passengers. And how we did this was to imagine why they would want to ride the bus. And we used, I almost feel it's nefarious now, but we used an AI algorithm, very famous one, modified it and generated schedules that we thought would appeal to students, and it did. And we saved money actually, reducing fuel costs, and moved about 15% more people. What this documentary makes me reflect upon, though, is that no one was asked if they wanted to participate. We actually took all the registrar data that IU has and presupposed that everyone would be riding a bus, and used our model for the bus riding to improve that. So in a strange way, I am one of the violators from this perspective, but I guess what this gives evidence of is that, as Karen said, we oftentimes are part of the troop that acts in a way that we fundamentally don't imagine ourselves to be acting, and it's a shock. It's a shock.
Well, thank you. So it turns out you do work with data sets that involve people.
Yes.
Just a follow-up question. It occurs to me it would have been an interesting thing not only to ask permission from the students, but to collaborate with social scientists who do that kind of research and survey and that kind of thing.
Absolutely. What I would say is, in data science, and we're from one viewpoint we're relatively new, but on another point we're a bit old, coming from Tukey's description that there should be something more to statistics than just statistics at the time. I would say we're not taught or encouraged to involve ourselves with social aspects, because we think of our algorithms as being inherently unbiased, right? And even though Wiener identified this problem more than a half a century ago, I would say there's few curricula that exist in computer science that would say, look, you have to really think about what the humanistic elements are and who you're affecting.
Okay, and Beth, could you build on the ray of hope that Memo mentioned? What are reasons that people might want to go into computer science, AI research? I just saw today an email that IU trustees have approved the first BA in artificial intelligence. And so just wanted to give you a sense for why people should do this or consider it.
Thank you, Vivian. And I would like to comment also on the documentary, which I thought was fabulous, and I was delighted to see it move from awareness to impact, and particularly in the House legislation that's pending, relatively recent and pending. So I think that's a very, very positive development. I do think that we all have to localize that, and one way that it struck me that we can localize this, and building off of something Karen said, and Karen, and you hit it on the head when you said that we basically just grab data to feed our models in the class setting, and too often the problem is getting a hold of data that you can use in the classroom. And so the second order would be ensuring, given abundance of data that you can use in the classroom, that it has been vetted for and adjusted for biases, so that could be talked about as the feeding goes on. So I think we could integrate this kind of awareness into the classroom, and perhaps we're collecting data that we can use across, say, I'm in Luddy, we can use across all of Luddy, that we know and can talk about the characteristics. We're not just grabbing whatever we can get a hold of. So I think we have a problem there, but we also have an opportunity to work together to solve that. And I guess I also take hope in, something like the Center of Excellence for Women in Technology is doing with its Advocates and Allies program. And so it struck me that I thought Joy was, she's just marvelous in being an advocate. But she's in the unfortunate role of being an advocate for the disadvantaged, and it's always the Advocates and Allies program that CWIT is putting on, which exists elsewhere. Ohio State has a version also, recognizing that You need people at the table that are not the disadvantaged, that are speaking for and about the problem. So I think, so she's out there and she's leading the way, which we need people that are doing that. But the rest of us can bring a diversity of faces to the table to try to work on this both locally and nationally, as Joy has done very, very effectively.
Thank you, Beth. And I want to point out that it gladdened my English professor heart to see that Joy came to identify this project through taking a class that assigned science fiction and made students do some active thinking and try and bring to life machines or images from the science fiction. And so that brings me about to ask a question related to your second point, Beth, and this applies to all three of you. It's always, the burden that the most disadvantaged bear of having to draw attention to continued oppression, in this case, through algorithms. But to what degree are all of the people who take selfies and upload them to social media helping to diversify or broaden the range of faces that are available? And as a neophyte, as someone without enough background, what can you tell me? Is that helping in any way, or is that only going to consumer purposes?
Well, I don't know if Beth was going to talk. I'm sorry, Beth. There's a little bit of lag.
Go ahead, Mehmet, please.
I think it was in the documentary mentioned directly and indirectly, but it's part of the problem with data that after you get a critical mass, you don't sway in any part from what that mass says. So I would say to you, with all these people uploading the pictures, we already know what we are going to know and say. And that's part of the most dramatic anti-human aspect, because we're individuals. We're not a number. We're not a score. We're not a series of bits. And I actually encourage my students to buy their own URL with their name, so they can affect what I call their cyber footprint. Because now there's two people that exist on Earth. There's you, the flesh and blood person, and then there's this monstrosity that's created from all these applications that you use, the searching, selfies, going to Amazon. And oftentimes I think I call it a monstrosity because it's kind of like Frankenstein. It's just built from different parts of what you've done, and it doesn't describe who you are. And as we've seen, decisions are made about you using this cyber footprint. And that means that you can't be creative, you can't ask questions, you can't step outside the comfort zone. You have to be in the majority of whatever decides the majority.
Yeah, I'll weigh in if I may. So, I guess I see three issues with artificial intelligence that as they affect humans. And, one of them is the kind of our personal rights. And this was embodied in the biometric, the images, the biometric data. And the other one is biased decisions. And this is the teacher getting fired and the recidivism decisions that are being made for which there's no recourse. And the third, which wasn't talked about, is autonomous weapons. And these are drones that have the potential to make the decision to take a human's life. So how I respond to all of those, and I'll just respond to the two that are most relevant to the documentary we just saw. But I think personal rights, I do believe we need regulation for that. I think that's the recourse, and we as individuals can push for that. We can call our House Congress people and advocate for this HR 6216 and say we want this. That I think is needed. And cities are starting to do that, as a documentary pointed out in Oakland, San Francisco, and elsewhere. With respect to biased decisions, And here in the UK has not UK, but Europe, the European Union has GDPR, which is the General Data Protection Regulation Act, that has a piece in it. It's fairly broad with respect to privacy, but it has a piece in it that demands explainability. And I think this, so also regulatory action, but this could force artificial intelligence algorithms, of which Memo and Karen have experience with, would force artificial intelligence algorithm developers to write their code in a way that it is explainable, and not, as our robot in the documentary said, "Oh, I'm written for efficiency and not for explainability," and those two are different. Those two are at opposition with each other. So I wouldn't be in favor of let's all upload more data in so that the companies can do more things with it.
Karen, you want to weigh in?
Against our will. Sorry.
Well, I think, for me, maybe I'm paranoid, but I have never been the person to be on social media and to post pictures, and because I've always been worried that the wrong people would get your data and the wrong people would use your images. And people see me, maybe see my background, and they figure I check off certain boxes, but I'm more than just an algorithm. I don't check off the boxes you think I am. And I think Joyce said it right in the documentary, where she said, if even you could categorize me perfectly, I still don't want to be tracked. I don't want to be traced. And that's something that a lot of people don't consider. It's private, it's supposed to be your rights. The same way how people choose to, like when you have wedding photos or whatnot, and you say you don't want it anywhere public, but then these other entities can take your pictures and use it for whatever they choose. That's your material, that's your ownership. And it's really sad that we don't have the laws to really govern that yet. So I would not be in favor of, the mass set of data out there, because I don't think it would help, because then you open the window of so many other things in terms of your privacy and in terms of what people will do with that.
Okay, so for our audience, very soon they're going to have a chance to have their questions aired. What's the one takeaway you want people to keep thinking about this evening?
I guess if I can jump in, because I'm so moved by this topic. One of the problems that we have is that I'm gonna make up a term. Old AI used data that we had some understanding of. So to find if someone was creditworthy, we would basically aggregate all the data and then use birds of a feather flock together. If you're like this person, you're likely to default. If you're like this person, you're unlikely to default. What's happened though with technology recently is this use of deep learning, which should bother people. Deep learning is an approach to solve many kinds of problems using these networks, and it's a type of tongue-in-cheek statement that they work like the brain. They don't work anything like the brain. What they do is a lot of math, as we heard one of the people talking about, and it's not clear what math they're doing. We don't know why it's saying something. So we're bearing even explainability now when we have these algorithms. We can't open them up and look inside and say, oh, this is more probable than this. Literally, it's just numbers. And I think that's troubling for me. Just to wrap it up, to give an example, a child needs to see only one picture of something or two pictures. She would know a fire truck after you show her a fire truck. In deep learning, you have to show 1 million fire trucks. Why? Because it doesn't see things like we do, and therefore it's biased on those million fire trucks that you took a picture of, and maybe you didn't take the right kinds of pictures. And so I'll end with that.
Beth or Karen?
Karen, go ahead.
I would agree with that as well, and I think what people need to be most cognizant of is the role that we play, because we all call for equity, we all call for justice, we all call diversity, but in our day-to-day dealings and the research that we engage in, what efforts are we truly making to overcome the biases that exist? Because we first have to acknowledge what we're doing. sometimes you just never notice it until something like this brings it all into your attention. So I just think we all need to be mindful of what we do and how we do it, and recognizing it as a first step. And I hope, like Joy, we can go on and actually change things for the better.
Thank you.
Excellent. If I may, so I would say two things. I would say to the audience, if you are a student, then advocate for, and I'm not going to say ethics, but advocate for the topic of AI bias in your classes, and not just a tag on ethics class, because that's not enough. It's kind of this integrated thing, like I was talking about earlier with let's bring in data that's biased versus not biased and talk about it before we use it in our ML. And I would say if you're not a student, then I would recommend that you advocate for the kinds of actions locally and nationally that we need to bring the rights about for citizens in the United States that are obviously lagging, as we heard from the UK perspective.
On that note, could the FDA for algorithms model work? Could there be a single entity in the US, or would you need to have a network of regulatory entities around the world for this to make a difference?
Yeah, I'll weigh in and say Ben Schneiderman, who's at the University of Maryland, College Park, advocates for a national algorithm safety board that has a kind of an oversight. And he would argue on the case of deep learning that Memo was talking about, if you can't explain an algorithm, it doesn't get used in a commercial or public setting, public health setting or public office setting. You know, so I think that there is, it takes a while to get to that, but I would think that along with something like GDPR could take us where we need to be.
Karen, would that be reassuring?
To me, no. I always, I mean, when you look at the Facebook and what they did in terms of the elections and putting the pictures of people who voted and whatnot, and stating that, you know, they could move how much of the voters. I mean, that's scary to think of. And, you know, if you have guidelines that people need to abide by, people always, because these entities, because they have so much money and power, they always find loopholes. They always find a way around it. And I don't know what the solution is. I think more people need to rise up. They need to acknowledge what's happening, and they need to want to make a change.
Memo,
I'll add a,
Oh, yeah, I
I'm
was just,
sorry,
oh, go
I'll
ahead,
add a
please. Yeah.
third- Oh, I'm sorry, I'll add a third piece to mine, along with the regulation National Safety Algorithmics Board. I'll say people like you, Karen, who are advocates and pushing.
I would say probably, Vivian, there'd have to be a lot of entities. You can look at, for instance, finding a mate. It's one of the most common things that people use the internet for. And what I show my students is most of the time they use trigonometry. They look at the angle between two bit vectors, and if your angle is small, then you must quote unquote love that person. If the angle's big, you don't. And what this really speaks to is that none of these humanistic elements are computable. There's just no thing for like food. I know you're an expert in food. Whether food tastes good or not can't be decided by a computer, but yet we do it anyway. So
this is a good time to then turn things over to Brittany, who's going to share some of the audience questions.
Yeah, we've got a wealth of questions tonight for you all, so hopefully we can get to most of them. First question, Willa asks, what I got from the documentary was that we need to focus on the structures of power that underpin these systems and processes that can allow or prevent the rollout of any particular technology. As an individual, I feel powerless against these structures. What steps can I take to influence what happens? As a person of color, frankly, this is scary.
I wish I had an answer. I worry that this is, everyone's watching the film and we know how it's going to end. I don't know. And I agree with her 100%. I mean, look at Amazon. giving just lip service to what was discovered, and finally, because of the pushback and the after Joyce began her work, only after a significant amount of pushback did it stop. But I guarantee you they've not stopped working on it, and probably they're going to not let me buy anything anymore on Amazon, but I suspect they're not going to stop it.
Mhm. Are
Also,
there anything that any of you have done personally to, your own? I've stopped shopping at Amazon, so they can ban me all they want. I've stopped.
I don't participate in any of the social media. I don't have an Instagram or
Mhm.
any of this stuff. So
I read Twitter, but I don't tweet very often.
but they know that you're reading Twitter. So
I know.
Yeah. Yeah. Beth or Karen, did you want to respond?
Yeah, so I'm thinking, I'm sorry, it's okay, Karen, I'll jump in. I'm thinking that, again, that, obviously when you've got these large companies and though they are coming to the attention of Congress now, so, but yes, these are slow processes. But I am thinking through the responses in the couple cases, what Tay was an obvious case, the chatbot that went crazy. And then there was the Amazon bias. I mean, there was the Apple Card bias in amount of credit a person got. And then there was the Amazon bias in hiring where they were rejecting resumes that had any indication of gender would be rejected. And these things do come to light. And there are changes. So I mean, light is always good, but yes, we're up against sizable power that will take a while to fix. But yeah, so I agree with Willa's concern.
Yeah, and I would just add to that, because I too feel powerless, and maybe one individual, you don't have enough sway. But I think once you recognize that there is a bias within, if it's an entity or if it's within a program or whatever it is, we, the consumers, we have power. So if you get people together, you write a petition, you do something, you bring the attention to the powers that be, that's how we can influence something.
Let me also speak to a slightly different angle, which I think is also positive. Your federal funding agencies are they care deeply about workforce development, and education is a key piece of workforce development. They recognize with the national initiatives around artificial intelligence that ethics plays a role, and ethics will play a really important role. Ethics and bias play a very important role. So they are prioritizing funding workforce development activity in AI bias and ethics. So what that means is that they're encouraging universities to respond to educate our next generation of scholars and workers to be more aware of the issues. And I think that in the future will help, because we won't necessarily have the same group of people going into coding the next solutions without at least some awareness of what, and questioning what some of the broader social issues are. We obviously got here because that awareness was not in our workforce development activities in the academy.
And sort of speaking to perhaps the powerlessness that this is just something not we need to learn to live with, but that's not going to ever go away entirely. Given privacy concerns, Kelsey asks, is the goal to minimize algorithm use or to make it more equitable?
I will jump in and say the goal is to make it explainable. And if it can't be, so an algorithm being explainable is an algorithm where when you open up the cover, you can see how it got to its decision, or it gives a trustworthy explanation. It's treated as a black box, and it gives a trustworthy explanation of how it arrived at its decision. And if it can't explain itself, it ought not be used in a setting where it's touching humans, where it's outside of a lab or research setting.
Mm-hmm.
And our IRBs could look for that and make sure that that's written in there too.
I
Memo?
agree completely what Beth said. I'll put a different spin on it, that there will always be, with a growing size of population and data, the raison d'etre that they need to scale, and we don't have people that we can put to look at things. For instance, the data coming from the satellites to look at the Milky Way, there's simply not enough time. So they're going to say that. They're going to say, you know what, we don't have enough person power to look at all the resumes. So we're going to trust that we have a system that's going to scale and be adequate. So I think this is what we have to fight.
I think algorithms are useful, but I don't think they should be the final say. I think we need to have some person there looking at it. It can guide you, can provide suggestions, but it should never be the entity to decide this is what it is, this is what this person is, this is what this person deserves. We still need to maintain the human element of all the things that we want to bring in with technology.
As was noted toward the end of the documentary with the example about the Russian. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yep.
Yes.
Excellent. All right. We have several questions actually about IU. So I'll ask all three in a row, and if anyone can address any of them, great. If not, I know we have some UITS resources that we're going to drop in the chat specifically for questions about IU. First one, are any of you aware of algorithms AI that IU utilizes in their hiring, admissions, and campus policing?
I am going to just intercede and say I returned from the National Science Foundation. I was in DC for 3 years and returned in August. So I was there for a while. So I don't know, I'm afraid. I can't answer that question.
Okay.
I'm in a, while I wasn't away for 3 years, I'm not aware of anything that compels IU to disclose any of that information, much like any place, right? If you go to the bank, you can't ask them to give an explanation of why you were turned down for a mortgage. So I don't know.
I will speak to the fact that faculty hiring requires committee work and people look through the applications. So that's humans, however flawed we are. That's people.
Well, and if I may, I think an analogy there is with promotion and tenure of faculty, where the portfolio is looked at very carefully, and the metrics are maybe one aspect of it, but there's a comprehensive examination. So yes, if both of those sides speak to a non-algorithmic driven approach, there's some evidence there.
The second question, has IU released statements on private companies' surveillance of the Bloomington community, e.g. the church on the Beeline and the Kroger on 2nd Street?
I'm not aware of any.
Right. Last one, it might be a good time for us to drop into the chat the UITS resources. There we go. It's magic. Sorry, that made the questions go up though. Final, do any of you know whether IU's partnership with Google compromises faculty, staff, and student privacy?
I wouldn't, but I would say it's the question is sort of its own answer. I don't believe that there's any motivating factor if they would that they would tell us. And I would jump in on one of Beth's last statements. Even when we do promotion and tenure, we use sort of strange things like H-index, right? So we get a number that we get to use that will assess the quality of, let's say, someone coming up for promotion and tenure. And this abnegates our need to actually look at what the corpus of work of the faculty is closely, right? All of these are time-saving devices, just like, I mean, that horrific example of the judge looking at recidivism. That's just a time-saving device. That means the judge doesn't have to look at each individual person. They're just a number. And then probability states that whatever mostly happened with the people that you're like, then that's what you're going to do.
I would say about Google that it's been in the news today that one of their chief officers related to with ethics was fired.
Yes.
So look into that and think about what that might mean.
And I believe someone from UITS just posted a link in the Q&A box for anyone who might be interested in more information on that, as well as what we dropped in the chat. So definitely follow up with those for those questions. Victoria asks, in data science, how can researchers integrate sociological or psychological perspectives to bring back a humanistic aspect?
I think that's a great question, and I would say while there are certainly some challenges, as I said, humanistic elements aren't computable. I think the greater question to ask is how we can incentivize people to do that, because there's no real bang for your buck. You're not going to be paid more because your algorithm is sensitive. You're not going to get published in a place because your algorithm is sensitive. You're going to get published because it's faster. It's better at predicting. So I think the sort of holistic answer would be we have to rethink completely what the purpose of these things are. I don't know if Beth has any different perspective.
Yes, I will just share a complementary point of view. The National Science Foundation, which is the federal funding agency that I'm most familiar with, has its funding is broken out into different directorates, and the technology directorate is called SISE, Computer Information Science and Engineering. Social Science Directorate is called SBE, Social Behavioral Economics Directorate. Those two directorates have overlapped in their advisory committee meetings, which just took place the last couple of days. And they've begun to share solicitations. The solicitations are for funding, requesting funding, on the recognition that those two directorates need to come together more closely. One of the examples that was given by the SISE assistant director when she kicked off the advisory committee meeting was there was an economist and a wireless expert who got together and worked out an economic solution for dividing up the frequency band that wireless uses. And now this is nationally used. So these are the kinds of collaborations. I know it doesn't get to Victoria's humanistic aspect, but this is an example, and it's based on the recognition by both those directorates that collaboration is a productive collaboration. And they're putting money behind it, which suggests what is how they speak. So.
Someone asks, in research with human subjects, we have a review process that assesses the ethics of the research. In addition, we use the diversity of the samples as criteria. Is there a review process for non-human science?
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay, I would suggest that this may be something that needs examination as technology touches humans more directly. It's almost like an avatar touching a human instead of a researcher touching a human, that this may cause IRB boards to reconsider the criteria for what is a study that needs IRB approval versus not.
Well, I know we originally scheduled to end the audience Q&A at 9:20, but we have a few more questions, so I'd like to get to at least 2 or 3 more if we can. Someone asks, has anyone tried to program the opposite biases, targeting white cis males, to try to retrain the biased AI programs, sort of propagating a balance?
I would say while it makes sense in a non-computational way, it's not quite straightforward to do that, because how we teach these networks, for instance, is that we give them typically positive things, and then they infer the negative. So you have to figure out what exactly you want to be missing. So, and this is part of how we decide what is no, which I know is a strange thing to think about, but in computer science, we don't have access to all the world's knowledge. So we use what's called a closed world assumption. If we don't see it, it's no. So if we would do this, we'd have to really rethink how we're fundamentally building these algorithms to improve. Beth, I don't know if you want to add to that.
Yeah, just a slightly different model that I'm familiar with is there is a phase where one is working with the data and preparing the data, and there can be fitting, examination of the data at that point, and kind of overfitting for not or kind of oversampling for certain classes to try to make sure your data set doesn't have biases before you even use it. So there is a data stage in some uses that does allow for trying to rectify some of the biases.
Someone asks, how can we see this film after the event? I will take that one as the person who booked it. So right now this film is technically screening theatrically, but only in virtual cinemas. So we kind of made a special deal with the film distributor to be able to offer it for free to everyone. And it will be available still for free through our link through December 7th. After that, you are welcome to go to the Coded Bias webpage, and I believe we'll be dropping it in the chat in a second. And you'll be able to see independent art house cinemas across the country who are screening it for a fee, just like you would pay to go watch a movie in a theater if it were safe to do that right now. So I strongly encourage you, if you want to watch it again after we stop screening it on December 7th, to support your local art house cinema. And I promise that was not a planted question. Yune asks, are there other films or books related to this topic that any of you would recommend?
I would recommend Sophia Umoja Noble's Algorithms of Oppression. That was, we had her briefly in there.
And likewise, Kathy O'Neill's The Weapons of Math Destruction I thought were useful. I would recommend doing a Google search. It's a really short YouTube video called Slaughterbots. That this is the drones, the weaponized drones, which I think is a good another kind of illuminating. I used it in my class this last semester. It's illuminating short video. Communications of the ACM, for those of you who are technical, has been doing pieces on bias and fairness and the fairness, accountability, and transparency initiatives by researchers in computer science, and so if that's, I would pay attention to those for those of you in the audience who are technical.
I would suggest Deborah Johnson's work. If you Google 1985 and then Christina Gorniak and 1985, and I would say I finished this a couple of months ago, and even though it's not about computer science, it is about technology. Henrietta Lacks, the story where a Black woman essentially had her cancerous cells taken from her without her permission, and frankly, her demise was sort of a second interest to everyone that engaged her, and it shows you how even quote unquote noble pursuits can run amok if there's not a humanistic element. There's a couple of great books if you just Google Henrietta Lacks.
There's also an HBO documentary on her story. Karen, did you have any recommendations?
Oh, actually, my recommendation was going to be Henrietta, actually.
Oh.
That's one I used to teach my students when I taught biochem. And it's one that really captures how technology and well-meaning things can go awry.
Okay. I think we have one or two questions left, or maybe this might be the last one, I'm not sure. Someone remarks, super interesting and very excellent documentary. At the same time, the documentary didn't really address the way the Chinese surveillance state can be weaponized, specifically against certain populations. Is surveillance and the reduction of human life to AI digestible data inherently the problem? Or is there an ethical way that this kind of data collection, analysis, and judgment can be utilized?
Go ahead, Beth.
I will pass on that one. I'm not in a position to weigh in on that in a way that's equitable to the question and the questioner.
Mm-hmm.
I would say having a parent from overseas and having a bit of a diverse religious background. My answer is sort of twofold. I think unbridled use of anything, no matter what it is, will lead to abuse. I'm sorry to be that cynical. On the other hand, I think it's important to recognize that we're going to have to rely upon these algorithms. So we need to face facts and fix them. That would be my answer. Sorry, I can't speak directly either. I don't feel it would be honest of me.
I think this might be our last question that we have time for. Because it still involves humans, I would like to hear thoughts on changing the publishable to take into consideration the morality of studies. Even if a study or algorithm is used, that doesn't make it right. Not sure there's a question quite there. Was there more to that?
I'll agree, but I'll fall back on my previous position that it needs to be incentivized. There's aside from what Beth said, really in the larger landscape, as you see, Amazon was never asked by any of these groups that utilized its software if it was reasonable, right? They just wanted efficiency. And always there's going to be a claim that you need to take the good with the bad, I suppose. But as we can see, when that youth was stopped in London, I mean, how horrific of that experience could it, I couldn't even imagine what that would be like. So I think we have to make an about face and value the algorithms in a different way, fundamentally a different way, rather than just pecuniary.
So I'll weigh in here. So Matthew Salganik has a book out. He's a social scientist. It's called Bit by Bit, and it brings attention to kind of morally suspect studies that were done, and the intention is for the reader, the student to and the teacher to think through the right approach to it. I think the question is an excellent question. Is that could we bring that same lens into technology, to the publishing venues that are publishing these kinds of works? I think that could be something that's taken up by our professional societies, and frankly, I think should be taken up by professional societies. I mean, thank you. It's an excellent observation.
I would agree with that as well. I think too many times we want to, or we consider the only things that are publishable are the things that produce the results that we anticipate or the results that we think would garner attention. And there's a bias in that, because then this information gets uploaded elsewhere. And so much of what we're doing now, especially with the pandemic, it's fueling a lot of research into AI technology. And we keep the cycle going because we keep putting in all these skewed bits of data, and it keeps developing that path. So I think if there was a more open channel of people having more equitable forms of research published and acknowledged for their worth, then I think we'd see more of it. But right now it's kind of like, a race to see who can have the best and the most attractive and that sort of thing, which skews the whole research process at times.
Well, before we close, I'm going to ask you all for your closing thoughts, but I just got a late breaking from our Q&A. First Lady Lori McRobbie is joining us tonight, so it's wonderful to have you out there. And she has provided another recommendation, so I just want to make sure everyone hears it. Invisible Women, Exposing Data Bias in a World Designed for Men by Carolyn Corrado Perez is a very readable book and echoes so much of what we've discussed tonight. So another recommendation from the Q&A as well. And as we wrap up, I do want to ask if any of you have closing thoughts before we end tonight's event.
Well, I'll just conclude by saying, first of all, I thank you for the invitation to be part of this showing. I thought it was fabulous. thanks to you, thanks to the Center of Excellence for Women in Technology. And I do believe we need to, I'm thinking from the Luddy School perspective, to really bring together our thoughts around how we can integrate this issue into our curriculum across the entire school. And I guess that's my commitment.
I want to thank again, I'll just echo Beth's sentiments. She said it too articulately for me to repeat completely. I would say, as a personal note, oftentimes when we work on these problems by ourselves, it looks like we're not making any change. And we may even find that we feel that it's hopeless, but I would say that's part of the human spirit to keep working for what's right.
And lastly, I just wanted to say thank you so much for having me and being a part of this. This was such a great experience for me. And I even saw one of my faculty, one of my advisors from Informatics on, and so great that you're here too. But I just wanted to thank you so much for the opportunity. But I think I would like to have all the students listening that we should all strive to become part of that Justice League and help to make the difference that we want to see. You know, we need to be the change. So, yeah.
All to action. Thank you all so much. And thank you, Vivian, for moderating tonight's conversation. Thank you for such a brilliant and profound dialogue and for being a part of our Science on Screen event. And thank you to all of you at home for your thoughtful questions. I'd also like to thank the entire IU Cinema team, especially Elena, Will, David, Ava, Jessica, and Seth, who have all worked behind the scenes to make tonight's event possible. Up next in our virtual screening room is the second event in our IU 2020, a 4-year journey through life at IU series. We're so excited to be working with the Office of the Provost to bring you this long-form documentary project by, for, and about IU students. We screened part 1 a few weeks ago and are looking forward to bringing you more from this remarkable project. So we hope you'll tune in next Tuesday, December 8th. To all of you who joined us tonight, thank you once again for being with us. Please take care of yourselves and be kind and generous to others. Have a very good evening. Good night.